It's become popular to spend time thinking about psychopathic and narcissistic abuses for us to obsess over what's happened to us in the past. Thank you so much for joining me today on Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Dr. Carrie Kerr-McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience and a narcissistic abuse survivor. In this episode, we'll explore whether this way of thinking is good for us and how to tell if we're falling into an unhealthy pattern of cognitive processing as we try to make sense of the past. I'm thrilled that you're joining me here today. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes and leave a review so I know what you think of the show. And finally, thank you to all of you for your donations, because this is a listener-supported podcast, and together we're shedding light on all things related to abuse. So with that said, let's listen in to this replay of a TikTok Live. I've noticed an increasing interest in psychopaths, sociopaths, antisocial personality disorder, narcissists, and malignant narcissists. There's a lot of confusion about the differences between these types of disorders, because when you look at the symptom list, at how they treat people, you'll notice there's a lot of similarities. Are they actually different syndromes? Or are they on one continuum? How do you know? And then here becomes even a more important question to me is, does it matter? Does it matter whether or not you're in a relationship or psychopath, sociopath, narcissist, or antisocial personality disorder? Is it significant of a difference? What do we need to know to keep ourselves safe? Should we be concerned about having individuals like this in our lives? I have encountered these individuals personally. In fact, psychopathy runs in my family, and I grew up around several individuals with probably who are on the spectrum. Narcissism is also something I'm familiar with. If you've read my book, Love You More, then you know I ended up marrying a malignant narcissist or a narcissistic sociopath. So I've had intimate, up-close relationships with these individuals, as well as being a clinician who's worked with some of the people. They don't tend to get therapy, by the way. Most of these groups are not motivated to change. They don't think they have a problem. They certainly wouldn't be vulnerable to a psychologist, but they send their family members, their partners in for treatment. That's who ends up coming in. And I've certainly treated the individuals around these people. Let's first talk about why it matters. Why are we even asking this question? Because I know there's a lot of energy on this platform and energy on social media across the board about the differences between psychopaths, malignant narcissists, and narcissists. But does it actually matter when the end result is damage to you and me when we're in a relationship with one of these individuals? Well, here's my thoughts on that. Why does anything matter? Have you ever asked yourself, why do you want to make meaning out of something? We are a meaning-making machine. We literally ask ourselves questions like, who am I? And what's my purpose in the world? We ask ourselves, who are these individuals in our lives? And what does it mean to me? And when we see a facial expression or something happening in our life, we make meaning of that. If someone smiles, we take it that maybe they like what we said or they like us. We do this as part of a learning experience, but it also gives us a sense of connectedness and intimacy. One of the things I found fascinating, this is kind of just a side note, did you know feelings are contagious? That's one reason why we enjoy a TV show or a movie in a movie theater versus watching it at home. Not that we're not interested in watching it at home, but what happens when you're in a group setting and there is this experience together of something emotional, like watching a movie, we actually catch feelings from each other. Have you ever found yourself laughing to something that somebody else said, and you said to yourself, I don't even know why I'm laughing, but I'm laughing? Or you're smiling now because I'm starting to smile. We make meaning out of what we see around us. And it also is part of our safety mechanism. When we've been hurt, when you get into a situation in where you've burned your hand on the stove, you say to yourself, note to self, I'm going to look at the stove and notice whether or not a burner is hot or giving off heat, or there's a warning sign on the stove. You make meaning out of the experience as a way to prevent the experience from happening again. So I think it's a good thing that we're asking about psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, and malignant narcissists, because we don't want to get into these relationships again. We'd like to know, what is it? what's going on with these individuals? Why do they do what they do? How could they do what they did to me? And how do I then better protect myself going forward in the future so that I don't end up getting injured again? That's so important to us. I want to preface what I'm going to share with theory versus research. And this is why you're getting so much confusing information about what's what. There's a lot we don't know. We're starting to know some things. When you really think about personality disorders as a science, understanding the makeup of an individual as a science, it's in its infancies. We really didn't start looking at this since maybe the 1930s and 1940s, more seriously when we got into 1980s. In fact, that's when the first time a narcissistic personality disorder made its way into the DSM-3. Previously, it had been called other things. We're just now beginning to unpack what is a narcissistic personality disorder. And in light of that, and we're also having new technologies, so we're beginning to see things through neuroimaging that we weren't able to recognize before. We're able to do things with science and the brain that we really weren't able to understand before. So those are the things that are beginning to impact the science and the information that is adding new light into what we now know. So please be aware that one of the reasons you're confused, it is not because so much we're confused, but there's so much we don't understand that we're trying to make sense of. It's a growing field of knowledge. What we know research-wise is that narcissists, as well as psychopaths, which would be considered by the DSM-5 antisocial personality disorder, have a different type of brain structure. In other words, when you would look under a functional imaging, you would look under like how the brain consumes energy and what areas are lighting up and having activity. Their brains look different than a normal population. There's areas that are underactive, and then there are areas that are overactive. Like, for example, one of the areas that are overactive has to do with mentalization of our sense of self. So you have a part of you that looks at you and thinks of you and is concerned about what's going on with you, and you interpret what you feel and see and experience around you from a very personal experience. That area of the brain, at least for narcissists, I don't know so much about psychopaths, is overactive. They're very preoccupied, concerned, and aware of themselves almost to the exclusion of anything else. It's a very overexcited part of the brain. The areas of the part of the brain that creates distress, like angst and guilt, remorse, regret, the areas that have to do with like what you experience when you're in cognitive dissonance, that area of the brain actually is underfunctioning. It's not active enough, which makes them assume that they don't feel the same level of discomfort when something is going wrong. They also know that the area of the brain that has to do with empathy is also another area that's underfunctioning. There's a lack of empathy, that part of the brain is also another deficit. So we now know that there is these neurological deficits, hardwiring personality deficits. Now, what's interesting is, imagine for a moment that you grow up in a world in which you don't see the color red. So whenever somebody tries to talk to you about something that's impacting you at red, you literally don't recognize it. You don't feed it into your input. It doesn't make sense. You don't make meaning of it because it is something you cannot see. You're blind to that aspect. I actually knew of two boys who grew up colorblind. And I'm not talking the normal, I think it's red-green color blindness is the normal type of color blindness, most popular kind. They didn't see any color. They had no color at all. To them, the world was shades of gray, black and white, shades of gray. Can you imagine then if I was to talk about the nuances of a sunset or how the Caribbean Sea looks different than maybe the coastline of California? They wouldn't appreciate what I'm talking about when I talk about the turquoises or the purples in the sky or the way the sun casts differently in California versus other places, which is why it's called the Golden State. I think it's why. To me, it looks different. It looks more golden there. But they wouldn't understand the nuances of that. They wouldn't even know what green is or what red is. They literally would be blind to all of this. So when we think of these types of individuals, there is a literal blindness to the way that they're impacting you and me. There is a blindness to feeling connected to other people, understanding what life would be like from your perspective. So that when you have it, when you're a little kid on a playground and you do something that's hurtful to your playmate and your mom or your dad or whoever, the teacher, scolds you and then asks you, do you imagine what it would be like to be so-and-so? Would you like me to do that to you? That hurt his feelings. They were like, I don't care. I don't even know what you're talking about. This would literally not connect to me. That's the kind of blindness they would experience, is that it's just not impactful because it doesn't exist any more than for these two boys, the color green exists. It doesn't exist. They have no perspective. So let's go back to the fact that we are meaning-making creatures, and you don't see other people's feelings, and you don't feel distress when you affect somebody. You don't have a lot of remorse over what you do. And as a result, what's going to happen? You're not going to have a lot of interpersonal connectedness with anybody. That's not what's going to be motivating you, because you no longer are invested in what anybody else's feels, because they don't matter to you, because you're not aware of them and you're excessively preoccupied with yourself. So what happens? Well, you end up defining the world in a profoundly different way than everyone else. Your motivations aren't the same as my motivations. I'm invested in having good connections. I want intimacy. I want closeness with somebody. I care about how I affect you today. I'm aware we're having a social experience. We're feeding off the emotions and feelings of other people. They're blind to that. So what motivates them? Are you a psychopath or narcissist's perfect victim? Are you someone who's easygoing, agreeable, or open-hearted? Maybe you approach life with a strong moral code. Predatory people use our best personality qualities against us. Learn more about toxic people and predatory relationships in the replay of an interview with researcher and author Sandra L. Brown. She wrote the book Women Who Love Psychopaths and Narcissists and How to Spot a Dangerous Man Before Getting Involved. Watch this informative and fascinating webinar and learn how to protect yourself better. See the link in the show notes to get your copy of the replay today. There's the first big questions we need to ask ourselves when we meet somebody. What is their motivation? Are they motivated by the same things that motivate you and me? Well, interestingly, there's where how we can begin to understand the differences. I'm giving you the key to understanding the differences between narcissists and psychopaths and malignant narcissists. Is first to understand what their motivation is. If it's not connectedness, if it's not intimacy, if it's not having a sensitivity to you and me, wanting things to do better, being a good team member in life, what's motivating them? Well, interestingly enough, this is how we can differentiate them, because I know if you look at the DSM-5, you're going to say, wow, okay, on the DSM-5, narcissism is entitled. And then you look over at the antisocial personality disorder criteria and you say, oh, entitlement and specialness again. You see over in the DSM-5 on narcissist, deceptive, exploitive, manipulative. You go over to the antisocial personality disorder, you'll say deceptive, exploitive, manipulative. So you start to say, well, then why did they classify these as two different syndromes then? They look awfully a lot alike between each other. Understanding the motivations will really help you to begin to decode which is which and which you're in a relationship with. So let's talk about the narcissist first. The narcissist's primary goal is self-importance. They are about elevation of self, self-aggrandizement, and their motivation is to get you to be a part of that system. They want you to participate, and that's why we call each other supply. They want you to participate in their self-importance. They want you to agree that they are a superior human being and admire, love, and adore them, worship them, and all these things. And so they then turn to you and I as a source of support for that, as a source of a reward for that. It's not a cooperative experience, it's a predatory or a parasitic experience. They're looking to you to increase their sense of self, to validate, poof up, validate their worthiness, and that you become a source of doing that for them. Now, an antisocial personality disorder isn't so much looking for your validation of their self-importance. Their primary goal, and I was looking at some different theories on this, Their primary goal is a radical disregard of other people for the advantage of oneself. They are about getting ahead. They want to win, and they're predatory in order to do whatever they can do. Now, both lacks consciences. Neither of them have a big moral code that guides them, which is not surprising based upon their behavior. But their objectives are kind of be different. Now, here's the other reason why we get so confused about these. The narcissists are all about self-importance and wanting supply. A antisocial personality disorder, which is a psychopath, sociopath, they lump them together. Some people say there's no differences between the two. It's all made up. It's a social construct. Other people say, no, there is actually differences. The person probably writes the most about these differences is Robert Hare. He's even developed a checklist to kind of help you look at whether or not you're in a relationship as a psychopath or that maybe you're psychopathic. So I would say he's probably one of the experts if you want to understand. Martha Stout is another writer that talks a lot about psychopaths and psychopathy. But here's the other thing that's kind of throwing us all. And I've heard Sam Bankman say this. It also is coming out of, Kernberg's work. So Sam Bankman probably is referencing Otto Kernberg, which is he thinks that antisocial personality disorder, this is Kernberg, thinks antisocial personality disorder is actually an extreme extension of narcissism. That actually it's a continuum, and narcissism is at the kind of the more low moderate level. On the other hand, when it comes to relational harm, they're dangerous. Please be careful. But when you think of like pathology, that then the antisocial personality disorder would be the extreme end of narcissism. I think that's an interesting way to conceptualize it. But there's also all these nuances, like what is a dark triad personality? How does that fit in? And what is a malignant narcissist or a narcissistic sociopath? And how does that fit in? And how does that differ from a straight-on narcissist? I'm going to give you some of the ways in which I think about it that helps me. Now, remember, like I told you, this study is in its infancy. There's a lot we don't know. We now know that it is neuroimaging that has informed us that their brain is different and that they have deficits, but then they have made meaning out of this deficits by the way that they see the world. So what I think is this. I think that they're very close and there's tremendous overlap between these two syndromes. I think there's tremendous overlap, that the majority of the people we meet with narcissistic tendencies or traits also have antisocial and psychopathic traits. And that's what's causing confusion, is that there's a rare person who is just only a narcissist or just only an antisocial personality disorder, that most of us are interacting people who have a blend of both traits. Because here's the big difference between the two. If you were to stack up the DSM-5 against each other, the main difference between the two is that narcissist is not ruthlessly law-breaking. That's really basically about it. They're not ruthlessly, callously, cold-bloodedly law-breaking people. And yet we all know how often they're exploitive and how often they run over our feelings and do really awful things, deceptive, gaslighting things that are offenses and moral degradation. But are they breaking the law? Are they stealing from their company? Are they doing these types of, kind of outrageous things to their community, to their neighbors? That's the big difference. But when you kind of like put it from that perspective, that's not a significant difference, really. It's not to me, because how many people do you know who are narcissistic who are doing some level of law breaking? A lot of them are. Maybe not enough to come to the attention to the enforcement, but they're certainly doing things that you and I would consider, hurtful and inappropriate, that would be out of bounds, socially out of bounds. That's why I'm thinking that this is actually a continuum that, I'm taking that back. I'm not for sure I agree it's a continuum, but I do think that there's a massive overlay of one on top of the other. So the people that you meet that you would probably call a narcissist probably also has antisocial or psychopathic tendencies. And that's why we're getting so confused. And that's why we want to know, what are they? But let me come back to where I started about we're a meaning-making person. I want to ask you, why does this matter? Why does this matter? I can think of some reasons why I would spend time on this question because, like I said, I married one and he had a lot of antisocial personality traits. In fact, if you get to the end of the book, you'll find out that I'm pretty for sure the guy was poisoning me. So he was trying to kill me. He was stealing money from me for sure. I know that was happening. I found the money even that he had taken out of the bank and he stashed it. And I was terribly sick. So why does it matter? Why are we asking this question? I think part of why I cared is I wanted to know whether or not there was any hope. I also wanted to know how much potential change I could count on. And I wanted to know the level of dangerousness I was in, whether or not this person could be lethal to me. But here's what I was ignoring. I was ignoring the fact that it already was offensive, hurtful, and I was already being harmed. And that maybe these questions didn't matter so much because I was already being affected. So why did I need to know more? But I know that I really wanted to know. And I spent 3 years writing the book, guys. So it was really important to me. And I had people tell me, just stop. It's really affecting you. And, this is hard on you. And you're really reliving it over and over. But I needed to make sense of it. So maybe that's what you're doing. Maybe you're needing to make sense of what happened to you. You've been in a train wreck, but you'd like to know what train hit you. I get that, but I think it's really important for us to ask ourselves this because is it rumination? Yeah, I do think that part of it is cognitive dissonance, that we're really struggling with making sense. We want to know what's real because what happened to us is that they replaced our reality with their reality. So here's the thing about my life, and I'll just use this as an example, is that I one time asked my partner, as we were getting near the end of I'm very empathic. And I could feel that we were nearing the end of the relationship. I could feel it coming. So I said to him, okay, here's what I think your typical day looked like. And I listed what I thought he did in a day and what we were doing. So when he wasn't with me, what he was up to. And then I said, is that anywhere near what's real? I knew, don't put him on the spot because he wouldn't tell me the truth. But I had to ask it in a way I knew he would tell me the truth because he wasn't going to lose anything by telling me that. I said, is that anything remotely close to what actually was happening in your life? He said, not at all. Nope, not at all. He had created this scenario for me, like a pocket, that he pocketed me too, but he created this scenario, this reality, like a snow globe, and then I lived inside of it and thought that's what my life was, and it wasn't. It actually was something completely different. He was up to completely different things than I assumed. So there's what he told me, and there was what he's actually doing. So part of it for me, maybe this is what's going on for you, part of it for me was so I wouldn't feel so crazy. I didn't want to feel like I was that out of control and had no idea what was going on in my life. I didn't like that experience. So that may have been part of it, is that you're trying to get your foundation and get your feet back underneath of you, that it's really, really important for you to do that. But this is a reason why I think it's really important that you know, is so that you know whether or not you can get the answer to your question. A lot of times we're pursuing questions that we'll never be able to answer and we'll never have any peace. And here's the bad thing about all of this, is that when we do this, when we perseverate, I'm going to use a clinical word, which means we excessively think about this. When we perseverate on these topics, we are, in a way, giving what happened to us control over us, and it's now defining our life. Now, if you know me at all and you've been on my platform, you know I'm all about making sense and healing and processing and really like grabbing hold of this. I'm not a person who just says, oh, think positive thoughts. I'm not going to invalidate or minimize your reality or dismiss that you survived something that was catastrophic. You did. You survived. You are surviving something catastrophic. There comes a point, though, that we have to then begin to understand what is actually symptoms of trauma and symptoms of pain versus what is it that we need so that we're safe in the future. To understand those differences so that we do what's useful, helpful for us, and promotes growth versus just keeping us stuck. I one time met a client years and years and years ago. This was a long time ago. I'm sure she's probably not even alive anymore. She was an older woman. She's probably my age, actually. She was an older woman, came in and she brought me like cards, birthday cards from her sister. She was furious with her sister And this was about events that happened in the past, years earlier than when I was seeing her. And she wanted to make sense of this sister, and she was enraged with what happened to this relationship. And you know what? This woman spent so much time on this old relationship that was over, trying to make sense of it, that it was ruining the quality of her life today. And that's what I don't want happening for us, is I don't want to give my ex one more centimeter of power over me than when he had in the relationship. I want to be free of him at all levels. He may or may not forget me. I don't care, but I want to forget him. I want to move on and have my best life. So it's so important that we understand what it is that we're looking for. Why are we asking these questions? So we can make sure that it's obtainable, that it's realistic and achievable, and so that we also then make sure that we're healing and moving forward with this. Are you trapped obsessively thinking about your past toxic relationship? Then maybe you would benefit from joining a skill-building group coaching called Reclaiming Inner Peace and Confidence After Narcissistic Abuse. It's offered by Trey De La Torre and me, and meets over 6 sessions during Saturday afternoons. Learn how to stop the repetitive thinking cycle and find the clarity and peace that you've been craving. This is a small group experience, so space is limited. And the next 6 sessions start on January 7th, so be sure to sign up soon. And with that, have a great weekend. I'll see you back here on Monday. Until then, bye-bye.